Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This event is brought to you by DataTalks.Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events. This event is one of such events. So on Fridays, we have live interviews like today, and on Tuesdays, we have webinars. So there's a link in the description. Just click on this link and go check the events that we have prepared in the future. For the future, we also have a Google Calendar. If you like to watch, if you want to stay up to date with all the events, you can just subscribe to a calendar. So you'll find the link to on our events page. And then, of course, there is this big button that you need to click under the video. This way, you'll get notified about all our events, all our videos. And then, of course, join our Slack where we talk about all nice data things. Finally, if you have any question, feel free to ask it. So there is a pinned link in the live chat. So click on this and ask it. And see, there is a question if we're going to do some coding exercise. Adam, what do you say about coding exercise today?
Today? No, unfortunately
No.
not. Well, I could try some on the fly, but it won't be.
No coding exercise today, sorry. So I think that's it for the introduction. So let me just bring my notes. And I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So this week we'll talk about metrics and KPIs, and we have a special guest today, Adam. So Adam is the head of machine learning engineering at Origami Energy. He's an experienced data and AI leader. He helps organizations unlock value from data by building high-performing teams, data teams, and analytic teams from the ground up. And Adam also hosts a podcast, right?
Yeah, among other things, sort of ever so slightly related to data and technology. But yeah, no, look, thanks very much for having me on. Yeah, I am excited to kind of talk about something I don't normally get a chance to talk about, actually, KPIs and how to like measure success and things like that. And
Yeah,
a
welcome.
few ideas.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing. So before we go into our main topic of metrics, let's start with your background. Can you tell us about your career journey so far?
Yeah. So I always start way back in the midst of time. I was a bartender, a competition bartender. Absolutely loved that. Traveled around Europe making cocktails, winning and sort of being drunk for a living, which was good fun for a while. Realised I wasn't going to make enough money to buy a bar by working in one because I wasn't that good. So I thought, all right, I'll go back to uni and get a proper job. Went back to do physics. Really enjoyed that. And towards the end of it, did a bit of coding. Went on to do a computational doctorate at the University of Strathclyde. And that was modeling high power lasers. So you might see some laser textbooks on the bookshelf behind me there. That was really good fun. And it was towards the end of that, I started looking at reinforcement learning and data science things just out of interest. And actually used some reinforcement learning in designing sort of novel components for lasers as part of that research. So that was really good fun. And I kind of really opened my eyes up to what you could do with this kind of stuff. As much as I loved physics and working with lasers, I kind of realized that I actually didn't care too much about the domain. And I just liked doing numbers on the computer and wanted to explore kind of what you could do with some of these tools. What really appealed to me was the idea that if you learn sort of the data science approach, the techniques, and some of the ways of working, you can step into almost any domain, any organization, and offer value. So given a little bit of time and your data, I can probably show you some charts or some models that might highlight some insights that you haven't seen before without being an expert. Now, it's quite a dangerous statement to make, and I do stand by, like, the absolute best people in the field are those that know their domain inside out as well. You can't really compete with those people if they have all the technical sort of expertise in the tools and techniques as well. But you can go quite a long way as being a bit of a generalist and just being very good at applying sort of statistical approaches and things like that. So finished my doctorate, went on to start an online retail startup of about 6 people in the east end of Glasgow. That was great fun, looking at trying to predict returns behaviour. So yeah, something like 30% of all orders for fashion, especially online, get returned. And it was, if you attribute, say, even like a £2 cost per return to each item, actually for some organisations that adds up to millions of pounds worth of return. And we did a lot of clustering actually, and you can really quickly spot some sort of permanently negative lifetime value customers by their early shopping behaviors. And actually they're the same people that get flagged for like lots of marketing and promotional material because they spend a lot and it's all disjointed within. So it was a really good product. It kind of didn't do very well, that company. I left and then it kind of disappeared shortly after. It was just a hard thing to sell to companies. You're essentially telling sort of sales executives sell less stuff, and that's quite a hard message to get across from sort of this startup in Glasgow. So I went from there to insurance. Absolutely love that. That was kind of really eye-opening about, because the amount of information you get doing car insurance, and working in the pricing team, you can find out a lot about people, and you can build some really cool and interesting models. And there's a lot of money involved, so there's lots of investment there's lots of impact you can make by small changes. And I talk a lot about that in some of the talks I do for like beginners. Like, look at, if you're trying to make a big impact, try and find like massive revenue numbers or huge numbers that you can make small percentage changes in, because they're the easy wins to get started with. Trying to make like huge, like 20-30% cuts in things from the get-go, I mean, a lot of these are usually problems lots of clever people have already thought about. So thinking you're going to come in and completely change the game is a little bit of hubris and things. So I always think that with insurance, there's loads of money involved, so you can make a big impact. I had a great time there. And then went on to working for consultancy. And actually, so that's kind of where my journey changed a little bit. So I've been a data scientist now for a few years. I was a senior data scientist at Incremental Group in Glasgow, great consultancy, doing some really interesting stuff for sort of small to medium all the way out to enterprise customers. And after a while there, I got offered the position. So they restructured the business and I got offered the position to act as the data and AI director. So that meant taking on leadership, like a leadership management role of the data science team, but also data engineers, had BI consultants as well in that, and a few DevOpsy people and things like that. And so that was my first real exposure to BI, actually, and things like metrics and that kind of consultancy, trying to help organizations turn their ways of working as they are, their business as usual, into stuff that was measurable, that we could build into dashboards and charts, because I wasn't really trying to sell them charts and dashboards, right? That's how we made our money. But that's when I started to come across some of the techniques for helping people, and like these workshops you would do to help people that like, we had bakery as a customer, huge bakery as a customer, right? And they know how to run their business really well, but it's family owned. It was a huge company, it'd been working fine for years. Why change anything? So helping them take their kind of ingrained experience and the gut feel and turn it into what are the actual numbers that a layman like me could come along and understand on a chart. Okay, these are the things that drive performance. That was quite enlightening for me to learn, and I definitely wasn't the expert there. I'm definitely not sort of the be all and end all expert now. I always think there's more to learn in that kind of space, but learning to sort of work with the BI teams and the data teams in that regard was really helpful, and in a consultative role. And then was there for 3 years, and very recently got offered the position at Origami, and had to. Basically, the stuff they're doing at Origami, super cool, really interesting for me, like trying to help transform the energy sector to enable sort of green energy to come in more easily, more readily, do lots of very big, very complicated problems, and again, large scale stuff, high impact. So I kind of jumped at the chance, really. I do miss consultancy though. Consultancy was great fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Doing reinforcement learning with lasers, I think that's the coolest thing I heard today.
Some of the stuff I did some cool stuff in my PhD, I won't lie, like that. So that was so the core of my project was looking at using ray tracing techniques to for laser software, using ray tracing software to design lasers, right? So there's a project called, there's a few of them, but ZMAX was the one that we used. I worked for a huge organization called Thales. So ZMAX is like a lens design software, and like you can build basically any kind of lens with it, do lots of very clever stuff. You can't model laser material, like laser game material in it. So that was always a big thing. They were like, oh, it's a shame. Everybody in the company uses ZMAX, but it doesn't do lasers. So the laser team were upset. I built a piece of software that allowed me to manipulate it using MATLAB. So, and it was all MATLAB I did. So that once I'm in MATLAB, I can do what I like, right? So and it was annoying because I built this stuff to automate Zmax, and then a couple of years after I finished, it became a part of the product. They actually had like a big built-in library to do some of the stuff that I'd done. So I'd spent months building that on my own, and it was a bit ropey because I wasn't a very good software engineer. I'm still not, but yeah, it was great fun. So anyway, what we got to a point where I did a few really cool projects, but one of them was looking at designing components that not just gave the best performance for like laser output, like beam shape and power and things like that, but were actually really resilient to misalignment. So lasers are basically rubbish. All lasers are rubbish, right? It's like there's an industry kind of joke, and I actually think this crosses over to data science and machine learning. But a lot, like in laser manufacturing, there's this thing that it's the best way to do something if there's no other way of doing it. Like essentially lasers, like if there's any other way of doing what you're trying to do, don't use a laser. But if you have to use a laser, then go for it. And I kind of feel like that's true of machine learning as well. Like it's the best way to do stuff if there's no other way of doing it. Like if you can do it with a basic model, something really simple, try and use that first. And I kind of bring that into the way I work now. So anyway, yeah, the designing these components is like, typically you would go and ask someone that's done it for 40 years, what did you use for these parameters, blah, 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 use their experience. And they wanted a bit of help. And so I've got this big piece of software that can simulate lasers now because I've built it. And then I essentially attach some sort of very rudimentary reinforcement learning thing with a few parameters to allow it to churn through. I actually started with genetic algorithms to design sort of the system, and then I did a little bit of stuff with reinforcement learning, but this was back in 2014, and I was kind of self-taught. It wasn't as far on as it is now. Something I'd love to go back and do. It came up with some interesting stuff. Some of it was maybe poorly formulated and a little bit like, okay, within the realms of the software, it was fine, but it would have been impractical to manufacture. But it gave some novel insights, and some of that stuff's used or it's been investigated a bit further. I think I'm not in the company anymore and I'm out of the loop. So what they've done with it, who knows?
Okay, so coming back to the boring topic of metrics. So I imagine that when you work on reinforcement learning with lasers, you need to track some metrics, right, to measure the success of your project. So what is a metric? So why do we care about metrics?
Yeah, and it's back to that thing of like, is it Peter Drucker that says if you can't express it in numbers, you can't manage it, kind of thing. It's there's a lot of ways to look at this, right? And it's a point in the sand. And I'm actually a big fan of getting going with metrics before you've got the right one or before you've got them measured properly. I feel that people sometimes fret and spend too long trying to find the perfect one. They do too much planning without getting going. And I think actually, as long as you think about calibration errors, as long as you keep measuring the same way, you can kind of see where it is. And once you figure it out later, you can go back and rectify things. But yeah, metric essentially just to measure, isn't it? It's something to measure against, to take an output and turn it into a number so that you can plot it and chart it and start seeing where it goes. So, for example, laser design, right? You want high power, and that's got to be above a threshold. And essentially in that, it's a really easy example to use. In that, you have a technical specification, the laser, the piece of equipment that you're building must meet. It must operate to minus 30 degrees and to plus 70 degrees. It must withstand force of X. It must have a pulse length no longer than this and no shorter than this, blah, 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 blah. There's safety standards. These are all numbers. And they're like threshold metrics, a lot of them, right? You have to hit these threshold metrics. So that's really handy for something like a reinforcement learner, because then you just fire all those in and you say, right, build me a system that hits these metrics. Now, in a system like that, where you've got maybe 10 threshold metrics, there's probably an infinite number of solutions to that, right? You can find lots of solutions within a space. The challenge comes in when you want to find the optimal solution, then you've got really a difficult problem to solve. And that is where you start comparing your metrics to each other to try and get them improved. And actually, when you're in high dimensional metrics, it becomes a bit messy then. And that's where a lot of things, like in running businesses and turning your sort of models into business value, big fan of using merit functions. So essentially, much as you would with your models, you take certain values and you take some of your metrics, you give them a weighting, you add them up, and you give it that a score. Now, people can get really lost in the weeds with defining what those weightings are and how things are important, and you can game your own metrics by just keep tweaking the nodules until you get what you want. And there's a really good XKCD comic about that says you can just keep stirring the numbers until it gives you the output you desire. Like, don't do that,
Learning,
obviously.
right?
Pick something and go for it.
That's what you do in machine learning, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
You poke it with a stick until it works.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's it. Trying to convert things into a valid merit function, and I think that gives you a number to push to measure against, and it allows you to say, well, this thing is objectively better than that thing because of X. And if you can even go back to like basic consulting, right? Any consultant you ever get into your company will always draw the grid of like impact and cost as their two axes, and then you plot all your potential projects. And this is a good thing to do with your potential data science or data projects that you might be doing as well, right? This is genuinely a worthwhile approach, but you plot how hard is this thing to do against how much impact is it going to have, right? And then you just pick all the ones in the top, all the ones that are high impact and low cost, right? You do them first and you work your way through. But if you calculate them as axes and put numbers 0 to 10 on them, actually you can get a score, right? One number, and then you just rank them. That's a really good way of actually prioritizing the projects you're going to do. That often gets I get flagged for that because people argue that data science, you can't put time bounds on it, and you can't kind of as tightly define data science that. And we can maybe get into that and running teams a bit later, but that's something that I think is really valuable to do.
Yeah, so basically a metric is a number that converts like an output of some system to a number, right? And then it tells how the system is doing, and then we can use it to compare multiple systems, right? Multiple things, and then we can say, okay, this thing is objectively better than that thing because the metrics say so, right?
Yeah, and units are really important. Being a physicist, units are super important, even in business metrics and things like that, because you have to make sure you are comparing like for like.
Can you think of some simple examples of metrics? I think you mentioned like revenue, and what are the other commonly used metrics that you, so let's say when working at a consultancy company, you probably work with many clients. So are there some metrics that most of the clients have?
Yeah. So there's all the ones you hear about in like sort of accountancy 101. You've got like revenue, profit, costs. You can go a little bit deeper than that. So if you start working with sales functions and marketing teams, there's a very common language lots of them use, and you'll hear about the pipeline, and that can turn to things. So in a sales team, there'll typically be expected projects and sales that are going to land, and that is, they will rate them by probabilities. They say, right, well, this project will land, and they'll give it a weighting. They'll say it's a 300 grand project, it's 50% likely to come in. So the revenue, if that lands, will be 300 grand, right? But what they will then do is they will multiply that by the 50% and say, well, it's weighted revenues. This is a really common metric. Weighted revenue is 150 grand. And that lets me, if you trust your probability ratings, which no one ever does, because that's a really hard thing to do, right? You trust your probability ratings and your sort of estimations of the project size. You can then say, yeah, the 10 million pound long shot that I've got down as a 5% is more or less valuable than the 300 grand that I've got at 90%, because you can multiply them all through. You can compare weighted revenue to revenue, and then make your decisions and focus your efforts on that kind of thing. Weighted revenue, you've also got things like marketing interactions is really good, and you get qualified leads and sales qualified leads and marketing qualified leads. So if you've got a website, someone downloads a bit of your content, well, that's a marketing interaction, right? And that's a great metric to measure, and maybe turn into a KPI for your marketing team. You want people to download your stuff, right? So you just want people to do that. It's maybe not the only thing you want though, because you can go and get, if you're just ticking that off, you can go and get 10 to 100,000 more interactions by doing a few TikTok videos than you can by writing really good content. Those TikTok videos might not, or probably won't, convert to any actual money, which is the point. Whereas someone that attends an hour-long webinar or a day-long event you've run is far more likely. There's more given more over to more of their time and commitment to you. So you go from market interactions to leads and marketing qualified leads. So a marketing organization might have criteria, and they use all these funny acronyms, like banter was one that we use. So it's like, do they have budget? Do they have the authority? Is there a need? Is there a timeline? And is there any risk? I think this was the R4, I can't remember. But they would have like these acronyms, and you answer these questions. And if they tick all the box, it goes from a lead to a marketing qualified lead. And then there's sales have another one, and they'll take it a next step further. And this is what they call the pipeline. As you go down these steps, you're going ever closer to money, actual money that's in the bank, right? And you can draw this for most organizations with a sales function. And these are really handy things to learn, especially as a data scientist, because every organization charges money. Well, the vast majority of organizations charge money and sell things to people, right? So they're the things that your company are going to care about. You've also got costs and stuff like that, debt. If you get into professional services, you can start to come up with some pretty interesting derived metrics. So you can go from simple stuff that you'd understand to things like burn down rate, right? So in a professional services business, I've got 100 consultants that are all, say they all cost X pounds a day to hire out to people. Well, actually, and I've got a backlog of work that we're churning away at. Well, at what rate do I churn through my whole backlog of work? And that burn down rate, so if I'm churning through 50 grand worth a day, because I've got so many people, then I need to be selling at least 50 grand a day. Otherwise, we're going to start having redundancies for people, right? So if your burn down rate is higher than your sales rate, you've got this situation whereby you're going to run out of work for people to do and eventually bankrupt yourself or make people redundant. You've got maintainability. So that then gets called maintainability of earnings. Is that so? We're now into like tertiary layered, these kind of derived metrics that will come out, and they're interesting things that get banned around some organizations. It depends on sort of where you go, and you'll have similar stuff. So we did a lot of professional services, and I worked and ran a professional services company, so that's kind of where I'm more comfortable, I'd say. But you get the same for manufacturing. Things like Lean and Six Sigma, they look at like faults in what Six Sigma is like, fault, how many sort of defective products in X thousand built and things like that kind of stuff. These are all good metrics to look at because they allow you to turn fluffy terms like quality into something you can measure. Right, new guy gets brought in, new man or woman gets brought in, improve the quality of our product. What does that mean? What do you mean quality? What define quality is always my first question, and that can get really hairy. And if you start doing big projects and investing money to improve quality without, in black and white, having what that means, you'll get arguments down the road as to whether or not anything was effective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you said one thing a couple of minutes ago that some of these metrics are good, that you want to turn them into a KPI. Mm-hmm. So what is a KPI and how do we turn a metric into a KPI?
Yeah, so metrics are basically, I always think of KPIs as like sort of the metrics that you want to, almost from a top-down point of view. From bottom up, or anyone can use metrics in their own work. I have my own metrics that I don't really use for anyone else, the way I work, right? Things that I do that I need to check off, a big fan of checklists. But they don't align to everyone. They don't guarantee good behavior across teams, and people might not understand them, right? Whereas KPIs are things that the organization have kind of maybe highlighted to say this is going to drive behavior. So they're essentially metrics, key performance indicators, that you are measuring the performance of a team or an individual or a function against. So back to the sales example, you might say, yeah, weighted revenue and number of sales and revenue might be KPIs. You pick a few, and it's quite important that you pick a few. And I actually encourage people to pick some that maybe conflict or maybe don't, that aren't quite clearly necessarily all in line, because it helps encourage like good behaviors. But KPIs are essentially the things that you are going to put in front of the CEO to say thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this team function, project, whatever, doing well? Is this a good thing? Should we put more money into it? Should we cut it? That kind of thing. And I always think that you need to make them, there's a lot of kind of rules around them, I think, for like good KPIs and stuff like that. But you want them to be easy for people to understand, to grok quite quickly, and just make a nice chart, make a nice, easy to sort of, if I see a map, right, and there's like 7 different colors on it and it's trying to tell me things, that's confusing. If I see a heat map though, and it's just going from like yellow, sort of blue to red, I know very quickly exactly what I'm looking at. So those kind of turning stuff into KPIs that are easy, visual, that kind of stuff really becomes really important. And then you just use them as sort of milestones, as checkpoints, frequently measure whatever it is you're looking to monitor against those KPIs, and you would hope that they drive performance. And the big important thing for me is you want to make sure your KPIs are aligned to the company strategy. And typically we would say, right, your company should have a strategy of what it's trying to do. Then your function or whatever you're like should have a strategy that's aligned to that, but more specific to what they do. And you just follow that kind of hierarchical alignment all the way down to the individual, to where you're like, as an individual, right, my quarterly objectives or whatever, my performance, my bonus, my appraisals all aligned to something like a metric or a KPI that feeds higher up KPIs that feed all the way up to delivering part of that company strategy.
So basically, KPI is an important metric. This is a metric that we want to put maybe in a dashboard and then maybe on a screen, and then everyone watches.
Yeah, in a report. You basically, I think a KPI, because right, that's what it should be. They end up being just more numbers that you have to, as a data professional, you almost certainly have to go and find, collate, produce and put in a report, and no one will read, right? Because people love them. The challenge with KPIs is people love them and they just want all of them, and they make KPIs that are maybe really specific or too niche. I always think when you're defining KPIs, what behavior are you trying to drive? They should drive a behavior. If they don't drive a behavior, cut them. They either drive individuals or teams to behave a certain way, and there should be consequences, like both positive and negative, for that behavior going like in the line with or against that, or they should be used to make decisions, right? That number should go towards making a decision. If it's a vanity metric, which is a common thing you'll hear, which is like people, like number of customers spoken to, right? That can be an all right sales metric sometimes, but sometimes it's a vanity thing where it's, well, I did this, and it's like putting busy over important. There's a really good quote from, I think it's McNamara, and unfortunately it's about the Vietnam War, but it's a good quote around that, I think, metrics. And he says we should be careful not to make the measurable important, but to make the important measurable. And that's basically saying, don't make numbers that are easy to count and get the ones that we make the most important. So when someone says, oh, well, my project's 5,000 lines of code, right? Well, that's an easy number to get, and it's not important. Even, I think Bill Gates turned around and said that's like measuring an airplane by weight, right? That's not a good thing to measure an airplane by, right? That's not a good thing to measure code projects for. Make what is important measurable, and that's actually can be quite difficult depending on what it is you're doing, right? Especially in software.
So you said that a KPI should drive a behavior and drive some behavior, and I'm thinking, like what kind of KPI? Let's say in your example, you were working as a startup and you were trying to minimize the number of returns, right? So the number of returns could be a good metric that drives behavior, right? So the behavior is that people get the clothes that fits, right? They don't need to return it, right? Is it a good example?
They get really dangerous though, right? Don't they? Because so I can drive that number. So this is one of the things about KPIs. You have to be very careful. And one of the things I often, when I was consulting, would encourage people to do is think about malicious actors within your company or within your customers or whatever. Think about people that could unlock a really big bonus, like a 10 times salary bonus. Say you started a new position and someone could get 10 times their salary if they hit the KPI for the year, or they smashed the KPI. What would they do if they were malicious and they were cheaters and whatever? And think about, actually, okay, so you've set a KPI, reduce the number of returns. All right, then, it costs £100 to return any item to this shop. There you are, I'm not going to get any returns anymore. Or actually, I'm just not going to sell anything. Sorry. I'll stop selling stuff, I'll stop getting returns. And that's a stupid example, but it highlights the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about malicious actors, and that again is a bit of a physicist thing. You kind of, anyone presents any kind of model to you, you immediately go to the extremes to try and break it to see if it still works. So that's a really good thing to do with KPIs. Like what there's because it's not good enough really to think about how the spirit in which they're written. And so the spirit in which that has been said is, I want to reduce returns because that's going to save the company money, right? But if you don't link that to sales in some way, or inversely link it to sales, or give the same person a KPI to drive sales up, actually you could get into a really sticky spot. So that's why, yeah, competing KPIs are really good. Ones that, like, so if I increase sales, I'm going to increase my returns. So actually having both of them as KPIs, increase one, reduce the other, that then that undoes that stupid example I've just come up with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so like we should try to make them less hackable, or make sure that people will. Yeah, so a good idea. Maybe in this case we can derive some other metric from both returns and sales that kind of covers what we really want to do, and we want to maximize the margin, right? Because when people return, we lose money, so we don't want to lose money. So let's do something that like to maximize the margin, right?
Depending on who you're working with, there's two approaches, and I think they're both valid. I think depending on your situation, right? So in some certain, so I mentioned maintainability of earnings, which is like a tertiary derived KPI, right? I said that to anyone on the street, they're not going to have a clue what I'm on about. So if I'm telling the head of the incremental group, like, sort of, incremental is not a big company, but say like KPI, say I'm talking to a huge organization about one small part of its derived metric, their executives might not really understand it. Think about your audience. So yeah, derived like something one over the other, like sales over returns or something like that. That's good if the people I'm sharing it with and using it with understand really easily what it is. And it's like, if I'm talking to data scientists, I don't have to explain the difference between supervised and unsupervised machine learning, right? But when my mum asks me what I do for a living, I say work in IT, because it's, do you know what I mean? You have to think about the level you're communicating at. So when you're communicating at that higher level, or maybe a bit zoomed out, or people with less time, or that just aren't as close, I'd consider reporting both numbers. Don't report the derived metric, report both of them, because yeah, sales have gone up and returns have gone down. I get that. That's great. You've used up maybe one extra thing. And it's easy when you're talking about two. When you get into more complicated stuff, that can be, you don't want to report 10 KPIs on a chart, because that gets confusing. There's a balance to be made. You have to really think about, yeah, your audience. But that's true of anything, I think, with data. That's part of the game, and why it's so much fun.
Yeah, and we already have quite a few questions, and I think I want to combine two questions into one. So the first one is, what is the process of coming up with best metrics? And then another question is, what KPIs are important for retails and grocery stores? And I was thinking, I don't know if you have experience with retail stores, maybe you did. I was thinking maybe we can try to come up with some metrics that are important for grocery stores, for retail, and then yeah, also go through the process of coming, like how do you come up with these metrics?
Yeah, well, look, I still do a bit of consultancy myself on the side, actually. I've not done, so yeah, if anyone's really keen and wants to go through the workshops with me, I can come up and do them, just reach out. But the process is a little bit, like I've said, right? But I come along and go, right, well, so I need to know what kind of grocery store is this, and what is the company's strategic goal, right? And it's now, that is a rubbish word to use, I think. I hate it, like, I say it a lot because I've been a consultant, but strategic and tactical and all that stuff does really annoy me. What I mean is, ultimately, at its core, what is this company trying to do? What is this organization trying to do? Because if this grocery store is maybe a third sector organization trying to provide healthy food to a deprived area, right? Revenue is not going to be a metric I'm going to use, or a KPI I'm going to use. I might look at number of new customers, or number of return customers, average things like can I reduce the average basket cost compared to the closest supermarket? Can I count like per family sort of number of whole meals produced? So if that is my strategic objective, is to bring a healthy sort of low cost food option into a community, then that's great. If I'm a company that wants to grow, then actually profit might not actually be my objective. I might not be, especially for anyone that's worked in a startup, you kind of don't like profits, this long distant thing that no one thinks about for quite a while, because you might have lots of investment to be the next Aldi, be the next Lidl, and you're going to disrupt the UK supermarket space by coming in, putting sites down across towns, and then you get things like cost leaders that will be products that will bring people in the store to try and capture people from the bigger supermarkets. So in that case, new customers is going to be really important. Just the volume of people through my door. Again, marketing interactions and stuff like that. How many people can I sign up to my club card or my loyalty scheme? That's a really important metric to me, because I'm hopefully going to be able to get them back. People I can get data off of, like their email addresses. Can I pester them with offers and deals? That's about widening my net, drawing more people to the store. Not that kind of stuff isn't maybe what my lovely sort of healthy eating low cost supermarket is going to do. So how do we go about defining that? Well, I come in, usually waffle for a bit like I have here, get the whiteboard out, and then start asking the people at the top of the organization or the top of the team or the function, depending on what level we're doing this in, what's important to them. What do they think good looks like? Steal other people's hard work as well. I say this all the time, right? Who's done what you're trying to do well? Can you find blog posts by them? What did they do? What are their metrics? So like if you look up, because you mentioned North Star metrics to me in the lead up to this. And I think Spotify's North Star metric is something like number of minutes listened to. That is it. How many minutes of audio are people listening to on their software? Brilliant. Just increase that number. That's really in line with what they want to do, because that captures so much stuff. There's loads of ways of doing that. Get people like me that are obsessed with it, listening 24 hours a day, and to listen all the time, and get people like me to share it and spread it to other people. And that's all going to pyramid up into that one number at the top. Lots of stuff underneath it. So come in, do a bit of a workshop, talk about what's written. You don't have to have an idiot like me in to do that. You can do that yourself. You just talk about what's really important. What are we trying to achieve? Once you've got that, think about, okay, well, actually, is profit on the table? Is profit still really important to us? In most cases it will be, so we'll maybe keep profit, but do I want my individual customers in the grocery store to spend more each? Do I want the people coming in for their weekly shop to also buy gift cards and buy like expensive electrical items, right? That's a great way to increase the average basket price. Or do I just want more people through the shop and things like that? So once you've got these are the important things to us, put more than you need up on the board, and then basically rank them and start, because you don't want to have like 50 KPIs, right? You want a handful. And if every individual can't remember them, like, again, these need to drive behavior. So the people whose behavior you're driving, they need to be able to remember all of the KPIs. If I've got 15 KPIs, I'm not going to keep them all in my mind. If I've got 5, I can probably keep track of when I need to do these things, and I can see why that's important. And they should then help smooth conversations and stuff going forward about decisions. And someone wants to do something and it seems a bit weird, you can go, right, well, how does that affect KPIs? And if it's all nicely lined up, it makes the decision-making process easier and things like that. And then don't be afraid to get going and change, right? You have to find a balance of try them out without sort of perfectionism in good, right? So try them out and get some data, give them a shelf life, but have a set review point. So give them a chance, but not forever. Say 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and go, right, in 6 weeks, we're going to have a look at these. Did anything change? Was it better? Has it helped? Kind of thing. Don't be afraid to change them. Don't be too precious about them. One of the other great things you can do is look at, if you've got it, historical data, and this becomes really important. How you're collecting the data is really important. It's all well and good saying like, I want my customers to be really satisfied, but I don't have any means of contacting them. I can't send them surveys. It's all anonymous. Web transactions. I don't even get like email addresses on them. That's okay. That's not going to be a great KPI because you're going to struggle to get the data back. Like things that require. So I actually have a sporting events company as well, right? And we run events, and satisfaction was one that we wanted, and we had to run focus groups to get that as a feedback thing, but I have to incentivize people to attend them because I'm taking time off them. That was really difficult, but it was really important to me. If I put that in as a KPI for my organization going forward, even just doing the KPI becomes a whole industry in of itself. And that if it's difficult to do, it's going to start causing people to cut corners, and you want to automate that as much as possible, really. Being a data nerd, you should want to do that anyway.
And how do we evaluate the efficiency of a metric? So I think you mentioned that, okay, metrics should be easy to measure. If it's difficult to measure, then people will try to get away from or not measure it. So how do we measure the effectiveness? I guess you came up with a list of metrics, and then you said we need to reduce the number to just a bunch of them, right? So how do we go from that to a smaller set of metrics? I guess we need to evaluate each one of them, right? And then to reduce. So how do you usually do this?
Yeah, and so I would look at, so for the ones we've come up, so say we've then got a short list of 5 metrics or something like that, 5 KPIs. I would then say, as part of a warm up to the workshop, I would say bring in if they could share it with me, bringing in old board reports or old performance review stuff from the team or the organization. Typically do this at a company level when they have these kind of management information board reports. So bring them in, and then you can look at historically, okay, can we create these metrics? And I'd maybe go away with that data and create a few slides saying this is what I roughly think these metrics might have been if we had the data. And then just bring up, again, open discussion. Would we have made a different decision having seen this trend line of this metric? Would we have made a different decision because that's the other thing, yeah, obviously collecting the data and automate that, but you also have to report on it and you have to make that super visible. And lots of people have this thing about companies have this weird thing about have KPIs and they never share them with the staff. Make sure the executive team know them and no one else. And it's why? Make them, I would say, Power BI, Tableau dashboards and mount them in your SharePoint or your Slack or whatever Teams. Put them in places that people can really quickly check what are the current marketing interactions and stuff like that, so that everyone's informed and involved. And actually go so far as to, in a few places I've worked, they've done this. And I tell customers to try this, doing your all hands, like if you do a weekly or a monthly call with your exec, have the executives explain the KPIs regularly, what they mean, what the executives think of it, and brings everyone on that journey. And then effectiveness, this can be a tricky one. It depends on. So I've done a lot of work with charities back at Incremental, and one of the things they really struggle with is what they call outcomes. How do we measure our outcomes? So for a childcare charity, right, I intervene with difficult or children with difficult pasts and try and keep them on a path to education and good health and all that, staying out of trouble. And how do you measure the outcome over the course of that person's life? There's no control group, right? That becomes a really difficult thing, and you do have to kind of agree up front, right? We're going to set these as targets because these KPIs should trend towards something. It's not good to kind of have KPIs that sit stagnant. You kind of want them to go one of two ways. Effectiveness then is looking at in review, do regular reviews of them, and just go back and say, are we using this? Is this a useful number to us? Does anyone actually care? Have we made decisions based on this number? Do we always just go, oh, yeah, but actually we'll ignore that because of this? And if that's the case, bin them. Don't keep them because you thought they were a good idea. Iterate on them, improve, agile, right? Just make better ones. Try and find something that works for you. That's why I say steal other people's hard work. Look at what other people have done, but make it yours. Take it and try and tweak them to fit your situation, because it'll be different. this isn't easy stuff, right? This is why companies like KPMG and that get paid millions to do this, because it's not straightforward. It's a difficult process. The advantage of consultancy is, and I'm not a consultant anymore, so I can sort of extol their virtues without sounding like a salesman. The advantage of, well, I do it, even though I do it anyway, so they getting them in is that they've done this more than once. So a lot of consultancies will have done this multiple times and have frameworks and processes to help you with this. As a grocery store, maybe you've never done this. Maybe this is your first, like, oh, how do I measure my business? This sounds like a thing I want to do, and to become a bit more sort of forward thinking. Doing it from scratch, I've been advised, like, use other people's experience and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Do you mentioned North Star metric, like in case of Spotify, this is the number of minutes listened. I think in case of YouTube, it's like how many minutes of video people watched. This. So North Star metric is what exactly? Is just a single number that like the most important KPI for the company, or what is that?
Yeah, often you'll find that, like I've said, they can, like the Spotify one, it can almost capture lots of different things rolled into something super simple. And that's the best metrics and the best KPIs are really simple, to the point where you could tell anyone, like on the street, within a couple of minutes what your company does and what the metric means, and they'll understand, right, that's a number you want to go up or down, right? That's kind of it. Yeah. So it's trying to find something that does that for your organization. And then, yeah, like the North Star, you use it to guide your decision making. Your other metrics should kind of align to it. It should capture, in essence, what you're trying to do. Some of them as well, like for these big companies, they're very good at this, right? Some of them are marketing tools a little bit as well. The metric itself is a bit of a marketing tool, in to say that is our mission statement. This is what we're doing, and here's how good at it we are. And it becomes easy for me to look at that and go, that's a big number, and oh, it's gone up, oh, it's doubled in 3 years, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned at the very beginning, when we were talking about lasers, you mentioned that there is a thing called threshold metric. What is the threshold metric?
Yeah, so again, for me, threshold metrics being I've said for most KPIs, you kind of want them to be above a certain, you want them to go up or down always, right? That's kind of improvement and growth. But there are some that just need to be at a level. So, right, if I'm running an airline, passenger deaths, I want the metric is 0. I want the metric to stay at 0, right? That's it. If it goes up, as soon as I cross that threshold, I have to do something about it, kind of thing. That's kind of how, and that's a big, again, an extreme example, but probably quite a good one. So these will be like health check factors within your organization, things that if you cross the threshold, there's a significant issue that needs addressed. And so for a SaaS company, it might be data leak, right? You might have no data breaches, or we want to, they can be more sort of, I've named a lot of very binary examples there. I'm trying to think of some that aren't binary. You might even have things like customer churn rate, right? So like the number of users you lose every month. And you might not actually care too much. If your plan is to acquire loads of users, then churn rate might not be super important to you in the short term. It will be in the long term. But early stages, just acquire. But so instead of saying, right, we'll just ignore churn, you might say, right, but we need to keep churn below 5% or something like that. If it ever crosses 5%, we do a review and we start to think, do we now need to introduce something else to drive behavior? Do we need to change the way we operate? Do we need to change the way we work? And until it hits that 5% sort of amber warning light, we'll be happy with that. So you measure it, you do all the reporting on it, and then if it's a thumbs up, it's a thumbs up, and you carry on. So that's kind of what I'd call it. You're not going to actively drive a threshold metric. You just want to make sure it stays up on the right side of the threshold.
Is it a similar concept to the health metric?
Yeah, or like hygiene factors, they get called as well sometimes. That's like things that this must exist, and if it doesn't exist, then well, game's off. So this has to happen no matter what. And these could be regulatory things. These could be kind of health and safety. Like these are quite common in these kind of fields. So
what is a health metric?
Yeah, and it's just things like downtime's a really common one for like SaaS business, like how downtime over a number of days, months, years, or whatever, like percentage of like servers that are up and stuff like that. So if that is trending the wrong way, you know you've got an issue, and you, again, to the health of your service. It's not really, it's like asymptotic almost, in that it's either good or it's something's going wrong. You don't want like a 200%. Do you know what I mean? It's never gonna, it's not a thing you're gonna drive for your business. As long as it's sorted, you can kind of ignore it.
Yeah, so it's like a threshold. So you don't want like number of downtimes, for example.
Yeah, but again, like with the health metric, it's like there's some leniency.
Okay.
Whereas a threshold, you would say hard line, there's a problem. With a health metric, you might say, okay, there's going to be some downtime because we can't control everything.
Yeah, and are there any other kinds of metrics that are important to know? Like we talked about KPIs, we talked about North Star metric, we talked about this threshold and health metrics. Are there any other types of metrics that are important?
Probably. I'm just trying to think. There's probably like, there's probably very industry specific ones and things like that. I'm just trying to think of very general cases, or like the actual theory behind this. And now this is the kind of thing that, like a really good BI consultant would be able to help you with, and say like, this is how I would turn this in, this is what I've seen before, and where you would start drawing other people's experience. Actual kinds of metrics, I'm not sure. Like I kind of draw very much on the specifics of what's important to you.
Yeah, we also wanted to talk a bit about metrics that are specific to machine learning and data science. So do you know that, like, let's say we have a data science team. So what the data science team should care? We can take I don't know, the grocery shop example. So let's say it's a grocery shop. They went through this digitalization process. So they have a data science team in the grocery chain. So what are the important things for data scientists to know, like for their work?
Yeah, so this is good actually, because what you'll find is, if you leave it to the data scientists, they'll come up with a load of metrics that are very technical focused, and it'll be around model performance, and it'll be around like accuracy and things like that, right? They're important. They are important, but I do joke that no one cares. Like no one outside of the data team will care. And in one of the talks I do for sort of early stage data career people, I talk about how if you can, in a data team in a wider organization, it's different if like technology or data is the core of what your company does. That's a slightly different thing. But in the grocery store example, or like when I was insurance, it was a nice to have or an add-on or added value. In that case, try and convert everything you do, every model, like accuracy and all that, try and convert it back to pounds or seconds, and leave it at that. Because ultimately, if the CEO of the grocery store group comes along, he's probably got a background in selling groceries, right, or running businesses, hasn't got a background in machine learning and data. So if you tell him, I've improved my random forest accuracy by 6% by doing this, that, and that doesn't mean anything to these people. That is meaningless. If you say I've improved the model and it leads to £10,000 a month in improvement across our whole revenue thing, that's okay. I can see the return on investment. And this is something that I did really early. And then once you're in that mind space, it helps you as a data scientist individual as well, not waste time on stuff that's like polish and gold plating. Like if you can, because that's something else a lot of data scientists are really guilty of, is like keep tweaking the model, keep going, because it's fun, right? It's interesting. You want to find,
yes.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why we all love it. But sometimes like the 80-20 is good enough. Like you get the bulk of it done. And again, getting to a point where you've paid off the bulk of the work, and you know that actually it's going to take the same amount of time to do another sort of diminishing returns type stuff. thinking in pounds and seconds saved. So the reason I like pounds because everyone understands that it's the universal language of business, and the kind of high ups will get it. Seconds is a good one as well because you can talk about time saved and things like that. That's easy for people to get. You haven't got to explain to the people in the sales department what you mean by your F1 score and stuff like that, or your ROC AUC, right? So these are all like numbers that we love because we get them. And if you're talking to me, please tell me your ROC AUC and you want the F1 scores. I like all that. But if I'm then going to help you try and sell your next project to the function lead, let's do it in pound coins, let's do it in seconds, because they're the numbers that are on slides. And always thinking that I'm going to present my argument in 4 or 5 slides, and my boss or whoever I'm presenting it to is going to copy exactly those slides and present them up the chain. If you think about that, right, is your boss's boss going to be able to explain your F1 score to their boss? If the answer is no, let's go back to pounds, seconds, whatever. And some organizations, actually everyone's super technically literate. The technical appetite's really high. It might be you're in a startup and everyone's a data scientist, in which case throw that out the window, go nuts kind of thing. You'll find your own way there, but it is a useful sort of approach. All the fun.
And you mentioned you said about measuring and control group. So I guess this is something also important. Like once you have a model, you want to measure it. So how do we usually go about this? Maybe you can just go a bit into details, like how do we do this usually?
Yeah. So once what you're talking about, sort of implement a model, how to.
Yeah, we have a metric and we have a model, and then if we say it's like AUC is 80%, nobody will care, right? So we need to come to the business people saying, hey, my model generated that percent of uplift in minutes. Like now my new recommender system at Spotify causes like 10% more minutes listen, right? So how do we actually measure that?
So it's really hard, actually. That is really, really difficult. If you're lucky enough to live in a world where you've got a good simulator and the cost of simulation is low, then simulate it, right? i.e. reinforcement learning, they're great, right? That's rare. If you've got good historical data whereby, and I'm thinking of a very specific use case, good historical data whereby your actions don't make much of an impact on the state of the world, i.e. the stock market, right? So if your model, you can play it against the historical data, that's a really good, like back testing and looking up the way quants do that. That's a really good approach. Again, really difficult. What we did, and what a lot of SaaS companies will do, so what we did in insurance companies, and again, a lot of SaaS companies do, is and marketing teams are used to this A/B testing or champion challenger modeling, we called it. So for a very small percentage of our customers, if you've got high enough customer numbers, a very small percentage would randomly get selected as the challenger group, and they would be served a different model to the one that's in deployment. So maybe there's no model in deployment at the moment. Fine, 95% of the customers that come through go through that normal procedure, but 5% get siphoned off, and it has to be random. And be very careful about how you randomize things, because using things like birthdays and stuff like that sometimes causes issues that isn't quite random. But 5% of them then get through the new model, and then once you've built up enough data, you can compare like for like, because they were the same time frame, they were the same thing. And if the challenger model beats the champion, the one that's currently running, you then promote it to the main model, and then change something else. And don't change too many things at once, change one thing at a time, and you'll be able to see slowly but surely over a 2, 3, 5 week period, depends on your kind of sales volume or your customer volume. That's a really good way of seeing, if you're in a live environment, how to measure your impact and things like that. I realized that we kind of start time, and I dodged what kind of KPIs should data science teams care about. I talked a lot about when you're communicating your output to other people, but internally there's quite a lot you can do as well. You can look at that pound coin value and look at like impact we've made, number of reusable. One I love for data teams is number of reusable like tools or applications or bits of software or pipelines that are being used and reused. So if I build a function to help me get data from somewhere and munge it a certain way, actually, if that gets turned into a utility that you can use as your next project in the same team, that's a positive. That's a really good KPI to look at. Look at the ones that there's a really good post actually by Domino Data Lab. I'll try and find it and share it. But they talk about a little bit of this, but they go, this, I think it's a bit old now, but they talk about some of these ones. They're really good. And also still other people's hard work, what the software teams use. They're not always going to work, but things like models deployed, that can be quite good. Like how much stuff is in production. Are you putting things in production? How many service users internally are using your models? It's all well and good having a super cool neural network, but if no one uses it, been a waste of time, right? So yeah, sorry, we lost that dodge that question a little bit.
Yeah, and that we have a related question. I don't know if you have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so a question is so we already talked about like measuring effectiveness of teams, like by how many users of a service are there, how many parts of a pipeline are used. And the question is, as a manager, do you find accelerate metrics like lead time, deployment frequency useful for measuring your team's performance?
Depends on the team. Yeah, I do. Yes, it depends on the team. I found actually from running teams, and I've run fairly big teams of data professionals, like in the tens, right? And I found that a lot of them really resist being managed. I don't know why, but it seems to be a thing in data that we don't like to be managed, and I don't know if it comes out of academia, but there's that, and I was like this as well, right? When I started, you kind of want freedom to explore and solve the problem and do stuff. That just doesn't work. Like it doesn't really work for many organizations. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. One of the things that I learned from Elizabeth Hollinger, who's head of insight for Greco, she's really done really good things, and they've got a great data team there. But she did a talk yonks ago about how they just do everything and I've kind of changed this a bit. So if I misquote this now, please forgive me. But if essentially time box everything into like 2 weeks, right? And I do this with my teams, and it's great. So you just say, instead of saying, if I say to you, right, how long is it going to take you to build me a reinforcement learner for that thing? We just, well, what? I don't know, infinite. Yeah, I could, like, if you want a rubbish answer, 30 seconds. If you want a really good answer, yeah, 6 years, I don't know. So what, instead of that, which is where we all get stuck and we say we want the freedom to explore, we don't know how long, you just say, you've got 2 weeks, build me something that's better than what's currently in play. And that becomes a really good way to discretize what you're doing and turn it into something you can measure. Then when you're in that mind frame, actually, it lines up much more cleanly with the traditional agile like stuff. Like, yeah, you're not going to get like user stories and things the same. It's more like running spikes all the time, right? But it will allow you to integrate your data teams more readily with those kind of management, like agile management practices and things like that. I find that works really, really well. And then everyone can trust it. And like your product manager, for example, can know that if they want an improvement on the sales model, then the cost is 2 weeks and there's no guaranteed outcome from that 2 weeks. You kind of set the guaranteed outcomes as a report on what was tried and how it performed. There's not guaranteed improvement, but then your product owner, who's kind of running the team and responsible for deadlines, knows that it's their budget, and they say, right, spend 2 weeks on that, 2 weeks on that, and then they can reprioritize on other things. So that's quite a good way of doing it. But yeah, it depends on the team. If you're in a team of software engineers that have learned data, then it's really, really good. If you're in a team of lots of data professionals that hate software engineering, try and get a bit challenging.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, look, it's been great talking to you. Yeah, sorry if I ramble and go all over the place a bit. I find all this stuff really exciting and interesting. If anyone does want to talk about it in more detail, I'm here. Please reach out. As I don't know if you caught the restart, but I've just had my first child, so I'm useless at getting back to people this last couple of weeks. But I'll hopefully catch up. But yeah, catch me on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. And I'd love to hear what other people are doing KPIs. I'd love to hear anyone that thinks I'm speaking rubbish. If anyone really disagrees with what I've said, I'd love to hear it, because that's the only way I think we learn, is when we get challenged on stuff, right? So please, if you think I'm speaking rubbish, they're the best conversations for me to have. So I'd love to hear it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us, finding time to actually talk to us. I
Thanks
know
very
it's
much.
not easy for you. So thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for being active, for asking questions. Sorry that we didn't cover everything, but I hope it was useful for you. And have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Goodbye.